the epic that might be way younger than you think, because we're looking at this book by Kiernan, Beowulf and the Beowulf Manuscript, where he basically says that, in his opinion, this story is not a 6th century creation, it's a 10th or 11th century creation, as in it was conceived about the same time it was written down in the monasteries. So yeah, it's not as old as we think. And he's done some research. This is the guy who has done a lot of work on the original manuscripts at the British Library. All of the digital scans we have of the manuscript are pretty much attributed to him. So he's a bit of an authority on the manuscript as it is. For centuries we've been told that this is an ancient Anglo-Saxon epic, whispered down through the generations, finally scribbled down in the Dark Ages. Well, it's not really the Dark Ages though, is it? The Dark Ages was a period of time straight after the Romans left, and everyone just figured that all learning and creativity and art just came to an end. And of course we have evidence that that's nonsense, and the fact that this poem even exists is part of that. So if this was written down in the Dark Ages, then that's an oxymoron. Okay, most scholars pegged its origin to be around the 6th century. We thought this was an ancient tale, but one scholar decided to ask, is it really? Yes. Yes, it is. A quick recap of the story. Most people know Beowulf is a heroic Geat warrior who sails to Denmark to help King Hrothgar rid his mead hall Heorot of the monster Grendel. Beowulf kicks Grendel's ass. I mean, he rips his fucking arm off and then hangs it from the rafters. Because why wouldn't you do that with a severed arm? I mean, it's not like it's going to smell. Then there's a fight with Grendel's even more pissed off mother. I've actually just done some work on a video that will be released in about 6 weeks about Grendel's mother, which kind of looks at it from a feminist point of view. I don't know how much I enjoyed that. Anywho, moving on. After that, he goes back home, becomes king, and eventually dies fighting a dragon. Spoiler alert. Now here's where things get interesting. Along comes Kiernan and his book, Beowulf and the Beowulf Manuscript. Kiernan essentially throws a grenade into the whole historical timeline. His argument, in a nutshell, is this. The poem itself is contemporary to the very manuscript we have, the Cotton Vitellius A XV. That would place the poem's creation in the late 10th century and 11th century. Late 10th century, early 10th. Late 10th century, early 11th century. For fuck's sake, Jason. Instead of a 6th century poem that was transcribed later, Kiernan believes that it was brand new in the 10th and early 11th centuries, and then written down as is. Although we kind of have some evidence that suggests that the poem that we have, the manuscript that we have, is a copy of a copy. And that's something we need to get into. I think I might have talked about it a little bit in a previous book by Tom Shippey, but I guess something we can dive into later. Kiernan suggests that Beowulf wasn't some super old tale transcribed, but was something fresh in the minds of those scribes. He's not alone either. He's got backup from academics like Raymond Page, Alexander Murray, and Roberta Frank. Okay. A couple of backups. Just because you have a theory and there are a few other people that agree with you doesn't necessarily make you right. I like the idea that people still think about this sort of thing. Of course, you don't have to agree with it. It's an opinion like everything else. But the possibility that this is late 10th, 11th century rather than early 6th century is interesting, I guess. Anyway, Kiernan didn't just pull this out of his arse. He did some serious detective work. The guy dove headfirst into the actual manuscript. Talk about hardcore analysis of three main areas: palaeography, that word. That's the study of the handwriting. Kiernan and other scholars examined the letter forms, the way the scribes wrote, to try and determine when and where the manuscript was created. Okay, so knowing when and where it was created really only tells you when that manuscript was created. It doesn't tell you when the story was created. Codicology. This is a study of the physical structure of the book, the binding, the paper, and the way the pages were put together. All of that can provide clues. Okay, so the book itself wasn't even put together back then, as far as I am aware. I mean, there's not much known about Lawrence Noel and where he got it from, or what state the book was in, what the manuscript was in when he got it. And that would have been in 1536, I believe. So if this thing was written in the early 11th century, we're talking about 500 years before we have an understanding of the form that it's in right now. The form that it's in the British Library right now, we think was maybe Lawrence Noel. Because we know that Mr. Cotton bought it, Robert Cotton bought it several hundred years later, and yeah, anyway, that's why we codify the way we codify it. Anyway, advanced tech. The book was analysed by fibre optic backlighting to see hidden details. Again, this just tells us about the manuscript, that physical piece of vellum that we have. It doesn't tell us anything about when the story was created. And every other scholar, artist, whatever that I've looked at, that I've read, has all said that the structure of the way the words are put together, the vernacular, the syntax are all much older, because they're copying it from an older text. They're literally just verbatim trying to copy it down. His conclusion: the scribes weren't just copying, they might have been recording something brand new. If they were recording something brand new, I think the syntax and the vernacular would be a lot different. It would be of that time, not much earlier, which is what a lot of scholars believe. Think about that for a second, though. It's pretty mind-blowing when you... But this is the thing, is that we have two different opinions now, saying that the text itself is evidence that it was made in either the 6th century or the early 11th century. You know, maybe I should have done some research on Kiernan to determine his credentials when it comes to writing. So why should we give a damn about all this if Kiernan's right? And I hope to emphasise that not everyone agrees with him. I think I've already done that. Academics love to argue, yes we do. It changes how we see Beowulf completely. It means the poem is a product of a late Anglo-Saxon world influenced by different historical and cultural forces. Well, from what we understand anyway, Beowulf is set in the early 4th century, given that one of the main characters, a fellow named Hygelac, who is Beowulf's king in Geatland, the story actually depicts his death off the coast of Frisia, and there was a guy called Hygelac in 530 who died off the coast of Frisia. So we can argue that the story is based around that time, so the early 4th century, written in early 6th century. You're still looking into the past. And there are just some details within the story that fit better if it was written in the 6th century than if it was written in the early 11th century. Simply just because of details. The burial being one of them. Tom Shippey argues that the details and how detailed that description was of the burial mound at the end of the story, you would have to have had at least first-hand experience of seeing one of those things constructed to be able to go into that much detail. Having that information just passed down verbally wouldn't work, and of course in the early 11th century we weren't building burial mounds anymore. That was not the way to go. The country had become very Christianized, and that sort of burial just wasn't the done thing anymore. I mean, we were only probably 50 years away from the Norman invasion. We had Anglo-Saxon kings, and we had people that wanted the throne. Everyone wants the throne. What the fuck? Now, imagine the implications. If Beowulf was written later, It reflects to a society that was already Christianized, more interconnected and perhaps more self-aware. It's not just a relic of the Dark Ages. It's not the Dark Ages at this point. It's a window into a more complex world. Is it though? Is it though? I mean, the reason why we can tell stories about these times and previous centuries is because we have a greater historical understanding of all that. Did these guys have that level of historical understanding about early 4th century? Maybe I'm saying no because I don't believe they could, but maybe they did. I mean, Bede wrote his historical account of all this, and that would have existed at that time. Then you've got all the other historians out there whose names I can't remember. At the end of the day, Kiernan's work highlights the importance of actually studying the physical manuscript. It's not just about reading the words, it's about understanding the context in which they were written down. The book itself is a historical artifact. Sorry about that, if something has changed, it's because my battery died. The book itself is a historical artifact and it can tell us a lot. Imagine if we only had the script of Star Wars and nothing else. How much context could be missing? Well, I think the difference between the Beowulf Manuscript and the Star Wars shooting script, the manuscript is effectively just a story. It's a poem. It's written in verse, so it's not exactly giving you stage directions like the fucking it's a Star Wars script. These are two very different things. Then one isn't historical, even though it was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. This brings up a bigger point. Should we always question the narratives we're given? History is not a set of fixed facts. It's an ongoing process of interpretation. Well, in this case, I think it is a process of interpretation because there are so many interpretations of it. But at the end of the day, history is in fact a fixed thing. It's just a matter of figuring out which is the truth. And I think that's the argument here, right? Is that there shouldn't be a search for alternative opinions. It should be a search for truth. Maybe that's what we should be focusing on. But I guess everyone has their truth, I guess, and that's what they want to stick with. And that's why the world is the way it is right now. Everyone has their own truth. Now, before you run off and start rewriting all of history's textbooks, it's important to remember that Kiernan's theory is controversial. Many scholars still believe in the traditional dating of Beowulf, and I agree with those traditional scholars. That they point to linguistic evidence, historical allusions, and other factors that suggest the early origin, and I tend to agree with that because I've not seen evidence to suggest the contrary. These counter-arguments are important. They remind us that history is messy and there's rarely a single definitive answer. This is true because, well, is it though? Because we have things like Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English, and we have the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, so we have hard-written things, but I suppose it comes down to the opinion of the person writing those things in the first place. Whether you buy Kiernan's theory or not, this book is a must-read for anyone interested in Beowulf. And I agree. I think alternative views on all kinds of things, whether you agree with them or not, is very important. It's about having a discussion, not an argument, right? It makes you question everything you thought you knew, and that's always a good thing, even if he's wrong. He's forced us to re-examine the evidence and think critically about the poem's origins. Yeah, I think that's true. I think, like I said, alternative viewpoints are always interesting, even if they're wrong. Not that I'm saying he's wrong, I'm just saying I believe he's wrong. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter exactly where Beowulf was written. What matters is that it is a powerful, enduring story that continues to resonate with readers today. It speaks to universal themes of heroism, mortality, and the struggle against darkness. Ooh, ominous. So, is Beowulf as old as your grandma thinks? Maybe not, but it's still a goddamn masterpiece. Go read it, explore the arguments, and make up your own minds. Don't just accept what you're told, question everything. And this is true of all aspects of your life. Question everything. If you're in school, question your teachers. If the teachers don't like being questioned, then they're the wrong teachers. Get new ones. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and tune in next week for more, or I'll see you Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.